This is tape number 9 with Dr. Miklos Talavera.
Yeah. So,
Hold on just a second. Let's let it get by.
it will go by. I don't know who is pushing what. It is never like that.
Okay, go ahead.
So, it's me. So, they wanted to send them away from the hospital. They didn't want to go because they had good time there, you know. They had their accomplices. So the commander wanted to impress them, and he brought in, you know, the political officer and the district attorney of Irkutsk region. That means district attorney is such a high communist official that he can simply liberate you on his own recognizance tomorrow from the prison, if he wants to. I wanted to impress them. Well, impress they did. I knew that I was in good terms with them. I knew that they prepared something, but I had no idea what. So when a free commanding rank enters in the barrack, you had to order "Внимание, attention," you know, and everybody stands up. "Внимание, attention." So when the delegation entered, and at the end of it, me, at the order "Внимание," you could see all over the bunk beds about 60 or 70 buns, naked asses hung, you know, on the political commissar, on the prosecutor. Well, he was gasping. No, ребята, no, kids, what should this mean? And then one of the kids stands up, throws down his pants, and urinates on the commissar, on the prosecutor, on the commander, everything, you know. And they just fled out, you know. Do you like it? So, and this is nothing. You know finally what they did? They brought 2 truckloads of soldiers from the Irkutsk garrison, and they put up 2 machine guns on both sides of the barrack, and then they drove them out from the barrack, and they lined up the punks, and they lined up, you know, the soldiers, and the soldiers tried to tear out the punks, you know, and to, like a stake, you know, with ropes, you know, to tie them up and throw them on the truck. But I gave first aid to those poor soldiers. That was during the Korean War. They told me, why the hell do they send us to this scum? They would send us to fight to Korea. This is something to do, not here, you know. This is how they cleaned up the hospital. Of course, they put the machine gun up as threats. They didn't open fire, but it took time until they tore them one by one up, tied them up, and threw them on the truck. And what the ladies are like, I tell you what the ladies are like. They are standing on the roof of the barrack, and they want man. That's all what they want. And there they stand and they talk to us in the afternoon, and they turn inside out their vaginas that come over here. I have such a tight one, such a nice one. So finally one of these mafioso criminals stands up. Sla suchka, завтра поебьем. Get off the roof, you little bitch. Tomorrow we shall come and fuck you. And then comes the answer, только не опоздай, but don't be late. Don't be late. So it goes. Well, please, this is enough. This is enough. I could go on and on and on and on. 7.5 years are lots of time.
Were you of any prisoners escaping from the gulags?
I saw in one camp, and we would hear these things, you know, through the grapevine. I saw in one camp, they always brought back the prisoner after they caught him in the camp where he made his attempt to escape from. And then they ordered us out at night time for roll call, and then they bring out a prisoner who tried to escape. He was unrecognizable. He was torn into pieces. We didn't recognize. It took time until we recognized him. He couldn't walk anymore. He crawled along the line of roll call, and finally they lifted him up. They put him into the camp dungeon, the karcher, and then we heard his groaning for about 2-3 days more, and then groaning finished. There was no mercy for escaping prisoners.
Do you know if there were any Jews among the guards or the commanders of the gulags?
Commanders, yes. There was, you know, Major Rabinovich, in 20, camp number 20, my first camp where I got, he was a very decent man. He was a very decent man. I don't know whether he later was purged or not, but he disappeared, and he honestly tried to help me.
How did he try to help you?
I got into a fight and a quarrel with an anti-Semitic bandit, not a political prisoner. Visloguzov was his name, a repulsive bandit animal. And Major Rabinovich, of course, couldn't tell that he helps me personally as a Jew, but he just told me, received me. It's so disgusting when I remember all the officer corps was there when he received me. They wanted to see what one Jew has to say to another, you know. And he just told, you know, I mean, когда две медведи хотят подраться, надо их различать. If two brown bears, grizzlies, wants to fight, that criminal me, you have to separate them and send me away. If I would have stayed there, probably I would have been killed, you know. So this is what he considered the best for me, to send me away.
How prevalent was anti-Semitism in the camps, either among the prisoners or the guards?
Incredibly strong, both. Both. Well, I told you who were there, the prisoners. Ukrainian fascists, concentration camp guards, you know, Russian Vlasov supporters, Hungarian fascists, German SS, Romanian Iron Guardists. You know, a very honest Hungarian officer just looked around. He was not Jewish, but he was a good friend of mine, and told, you know, it seems to be, when I look at these prisoners, that, but he wasn't a fascist either, you know, but he was not a Jew. It seems to me sometimes that the KGB gathered here the scum of the earth. The scum of the earth was gathered here. And the guards, they were very anti-Semitic. I had very bad experiences. Open. And that commissar with him, polyp in his nose, he pursued me even in Hungary. The Russians transmitted to the Hungarian authorities a file about me. I'm sure that it is based on exaggerations and anti-Semitism, because I did not deserve it by my actions. But I was Jewish, for which I couldn't go to my mother's funeral, I couldn't go to my father's funeral. Both parents were buried without me.
When did your parents die?
My father in 1968, my mother in 1979. And when I tried to break through when my mother was getting gravely ill, they turned me back from the Budapest airport. I could get from San Francisco to Budapest, but I couldn't make the last 5 miles from the airport to the hospital. And when I went home to see my mother, because one Hungarian consulate didn't know my name on the visa, forbidding list, you know, they threw me out of the country in 24 hours. The moment, because there I have to report to the police as a foreigner, when they found on the computer my name, they immediately sent me, and I had to leave the country. The American authorities turned to the Hungarian ambassador before the great changeover, you know, told him, of course, off the cuff, why are you so much against Nagy? You know what the ambassador answered? Radványi. Listen, off the cuff, of course. Later he defected. Listen. We are not for Nagy, and we are not against Nagy. Simply the Soviets gave us a list to whom we cannot grant a visa. His name is on it. As long as his name is not removed from that list, there is nothing what I can do. That's what the State Department got as an official answer.
What kind of contact were you able to have with your parents while you were in the Soviet camps?
I'll go back to this. For 6 years, nothing. And then those unanswered letters, which my parents gave me, and letters as such were unanswered, the parcels not delivered, and this was always this Yakimov, this Lieutenant Yakimov, this anti-Semitic commissar who did everything against me. He hated the Jews. He hated the Jews. And we were alone sitting in the room, and he knew that I'm not tape recording him. He told me so. And what a typical coward he was, you know. When during the doctor's trial and the whole thing, when Stalin started the anti-Semitic campaign, which was cut into half by his death, right? So he told me, what are you Zionists doing? So I answered him, a suitable thing. Well, Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. So he goes, and what else? And then he begins to quote me, and murder, and espionage, and the subversion, with all what these doctors were accused of. And then changing 180 degrees when Stalin died and they were released. Oh, this was Beria's provocation. Beria is an enemy of the people, etc., etc. And then I asked him, this anti-Semite, and who is Lazar Kaganovich? You know, the only important Jew in power. You know. Who is Lazar Kaganovich? He's a great man. I can't tell you, my stomach turns, you know. They can only make my stomach turn when I remember what these people are doing.
Was there
And
any
what else
Jewish...
are Zionists doing except being the national liberation movement of the Jewish people? Banditism, spionage, убийство, banditism, murder, espionage.
Was there any Jewish activity in the camps?
Yes, we got together in the barrack in the evening after work and we talked to each other.
Were you aware of the Jewish calendar?
Of course.
Were you able to celebrate any holidays?
I celebrated all of them, and I told to the doctor, you know, listen, I'm not going out tomorrow to work. Tomorrow is Yom Kippur. Now, you can be a believer and find some excuse. I'm ready to work on Vikad Noiden, on a holiday, Sunday, but not tomorrow. You can throw me, I mean, you can report on me, or you can find some excuse, medical excuse for me. But I'm ready to work on any holiday what we have that I should make up. There was a Karpinski, a Polish doctor. He might have not loved the Jews, but he certainly let me to get away with it. As a matter of fact, everybody let me to get away with it. I went up and gave them straight, you know. I'm ready to work in any other day, but tomorrow is my holiest holiday, and I'm not working. So I fasted, not only on Yom Kippur, I had many Yom Kippurs there, and then in the evening I had Goyim, you know, Gentile friends, you know. I was looking already, as my mother taught me, for the 3 stars that they should come in that I can eat. They're making jokes of me. You are looking for the stars, right? Yeah, I am. So that was. Now, Rosh Hashanah was not so important for me. Yom Kippur was very important. Rosh Hashanah was only important that I should count 10 days, you know, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur.
How were you aware of the calendar?
There were still Jews there. There was even a rabbi there sometimes.
Who was the rabbi that was there?
The rabbi was there from Lvov, from Lemberg.
What was his
He
name?
was also there since 1940.
What was his name?
Weissman. Not Weizmann, but Weissman, with an S. He was a very good man.
How was he treated?
Well, he was treated relatively good because he learned the skill of being a tailor, and a good tailor. And he worked, for the guards, etc. And therefore, he got a great deal of food, and therefore he could give me always food. He couldn't eat so much as he got. But apart from being a tailor, he was a very good man. He was a very good man. He was not even against the Poles. He told me, listen, Poles, there were 3.5 million Jews there in Poland before the war, and all they lived.
How did your release come about?
Release? Simple. Well, there were, of course, the politically correct people of that time, and they simply denied that slave worker camps exist in Russia. And there were 17 million people there, Well, these people are not bothered by truth or by facts, and a tremendous stench was risen after Stalin's death in the United Nations and everywhere about these conditions. But then came the decisive things. In 1955, the Russians needed to establish, for their own national interest, diplomatic relations with the German Federal Republic. So they invited Adenauer to Moscow. Adenauer came to Moscow and he made his condition to establish diplomatic relations that they should release the 10,000 Germans which were still alive from the prisoners whom the Russians sentenced and transferred into the labor camp. And the Russians had to do that. Well, if the most guilty Nazi criminals are released, Khrushchev arrived at the conclusion that they can't keep any foreigner there, right? So they decided to release all foreigners who by birth are from territories which don't belong to the Soviet Union. So they didn't release anybody from the Baltic countries, but they released everybody from Poland. They didn't release anybody from the Carpato-Ukrainian region, but they released people from Hungary. They didn't release anybody from Bessarabia or northern Bukovina, but they released people from Romania, and so on, and Austrians and Bulgarians and Yugoslavs, everybody who wasn't a Soviet citizen. So they began to gather us in 1955 summer, and in 1955 fall, they returned everybody to his native country. And I came back to Hungary, only to be thrown into jail again for a couple of months, and finally in June I was released, 56.
Why were you thrown in jail when you returned?
Nothing. I mean, we were divided into two groups. One group, the Soviets told that they pardoned отставить срок наказания. And the other, they said that the other group, about half and half, that the great Soviet Union couldn't, not great Soviet Union, I just feel my stomach turning, The Soviet Union couldn't, ввиду тягости преступления, Soviet Union couldn't pardon him in view of the heaviness of the crime of his, and предали его в распоряжение властями Венгерской Народной Республики. And the Soviet Union handed him over into the disposition of the Hungarian People's Republic. Those people which were pardoned went free from the border, and we went into a Hungarian jail where we were several months waiting until the Hungarians reviewed our cases, and then they began to release us.
What kind of documents did you have on your release?
Nothing. I was told to appear to the police headquarters in Budapest of my arrondissement precinct, and then I got a Hungarian ID. It waited for me already. This Hungarian ID, they had a way, to scratch little dots into it, that when a policeman, not a policeman, but rather a higher police officer opened it, they immediately saw that I'm not to be trusted. See? In this booklet, here, little dots were made, and anybody who was a police officer really of thing knew that it is this mark telling that I'm politically not trusted. But also because he issued my ID card, you know, I mean ID booklet, not card, ID card on June the 12th, you know, so anybody could put together when I got my ID card so late in 1956, there has to be something in trouble, right? Személyazonossági igazolvány, personal ID in Hungarian, with a little dots into it. I found this out after the revolution.
So what happened then after you were released?
I went home and I saw that my parents were pressed together in one room in our former apartment. From 8 rooms, one room. I had to sleep on the floor. My father procured some mattress. And they assured me that they still have food. And I found out what they went through while I was away, that my mother was in an international concentration camp, etc., etc. Every step of mine was watched. I was spied upon. Not at least by those people who were put into our apartment in different rooms, communists, you know. And I didn't have any future. Those times were worse than in the camp, because in the camp I had always hope. But now out of the camp, I couldn't get any job. I couldn't continue to study. I couldn't do anything. I was watched day and night. It was terrible for 3 months. I almost had a nervous breakdown. Everybody needs hope. One cannot live without hope. And I was with 25 years without a future. And then came the Hungarian Revolution. My mother always said that they made that for me. I fought, I got wounded, and I fled to Austria after the defeat, to Vienna. And I came to the United States. Began to work as a teller at the Bank of America in Los Angeles.
When did you arrive in the United States?
On my birthday, February the 14th, 1957, to the Brooklyn Naval Station. And then I went to Los Angeles, and then in September I got my scholarship. I began to study Berkeley, and from then on my career went.
What did you study?
Well, first I had to enroll in the Slavic department because there everybody wanted to help a former Gulag slave worker, and they wanted to push me through undergraduate work. Well, I got for my Budapest high school diploma 50 units. And then they made me with different language courses in Russian, etc., which I knew, of course, by heart and whatnot. And so they made me to, they gave me about 60 units from the Slavic department. So I got my BA by December. And then I started to work on my MA, already in the history department, what I wanted to do. And then I made a mistaken step that I began to study library science, which I never really used. I got my degree in it, I got my master's degree. And then I began to study for my PhD, write my dissertation, which was published by the Hoover Institution. And then in 1965 I began to teach.
What did you teach?
Well, I was beginning to teach at Idaho State University. Well, I taught, first Russian and Soviet history, so one semester the old Russia, second semester the Soviet Union. I taught English history, and I taught my load of Western civilization.
And where else did you teach?
And then I didn't like it in Idaho very much, although I had an excellent department. But I didn't like the community, it was at the end of the world, and I wanted to fight my way back to California. So I went to teach to the University of Portland, the Catholic university. And then I finally got a job at Chico, and I got there in 1967. I still sent the telegrams from Portland as a university professor of a Catholic university to Senator Morse during the Six-Day War, and everything, He answered me, Well, I was deeply worried. I was not aware of it that it will go so well. And then I got in September to Chico, and there I stayed from 1967 until I retired in 1991. Hoover published my book, Berkeley published my book, and then my Yorga biography was published. I wrote articles, I wrote book reviews. I became pretty much an expert on the subject of Hungarian and Romanian fascism. You see, a lot was written about German Nazism, Italian fascism, but about this Eastern European fascism, little was written, and nobody had the command of languages to do the research. So I tell you, during this whole time, the Hungarians gave me a very hard time. I couldn't see my parents, I had to meet them abroad. But later my father passed away, my mother got sick and she couldn't travel anymore. And then a colleague of mine, a Jewish colleague of mine with whom we went to the same gymnasium in Budapest, Ránki György, a very nice fellow, historian, intervened because of me on the basis of the Helsinki Agreement that family is supposed to be together with Kádár personally, the communist dictator. And then I could visit my mother until she lived.
Did you have any sponsors in the United States before you came here?
Well, it is Hayes, which brought me over. But after that, I went over to IRC, to the Internal Refugee Committee, because there I had some Hungarian politician friends, and his wife, Barankovic, the head of the Catholic Party, and his wife, by the way, Miss Livia, who was Jewish, took me under their wings and assured my scholarship and everything possible for me. I owe them everything. So, this is more or less my life.
Okay. We're going to stop and change the tape now.
Yeah.